Today's lesson is interesting because it focuses on the causes of the American Revolution. Now, the American Revolution, fascinating time in the history and development of us transitioning from a colonial power of Great Britain into 13 independent states. So, going from being 13 colonies to 13 independent states. So let's today focus on the causes of the American Revolution. Well, you can't really understand the American Revolution without really understanding the Treaty of Paris of 1763. This was a turbulent time. And what ended up with the Treaty of Paris of 1763 largely had a result in how land was divided and who had the power over land in Canada. Now, prior to the Treaty of Paris of 1763, most of Canada was controlled by the French. It was after this treaty that Britain controlled some areas of France. Now, England had fought with the French for control of the region, and as a result, experienced enormous debt. So, partially, to get at control of this debt and to begin to pay some of it off, England imposed many acts and taxes on the colonies. But because of America's location, the mother country had problems enforcing the laws it imposed on the British colonies. It is extremely important to note then that France owned a lot of Canada prior to 1763. However, when the French-Indian War was finished, England took over Canada and therefore began its quest to impose all different rules and regulations on the colonies. The colonies revolted. England imposed the Navigation Acts of 1763, which said that America could only use British ports and ship things only to Britain. The Stamp Act ended up being an act which taxed certain items going in and out of the colonies. The Iron Act. This act only applied to iron, but stated where it could be produced and that it had to be shipped directly to England. Only England could finish putting the items all together. The Sugar Act. This act dealt with where sugar could be sold and where it had to be sold. The Hat Act. This said that hats could only be made to a certain extent here in the colonies. The rest had to be completed in England. England began to abuse all these rules and would ultimately impose the Quartering Act. It was obvious after the French and Indian War that America did not need England anymore to protect itself against France because the French were out of Canada. Makes sense. England felt that since it supplied major arms to help America fight the French, England had to be paid back from America for this. In addition, England wanted pivotal control over the colonies. This eventually resulted in the American Revolution. Now, America felt that it could not be continually in England's shadow since England wanted to control the colonies. America told England it did not want to follow her rules, and thereby, in order to sustain its own sense of independence, it would have to fight. So in June of 1776, amidst the turmoil that had developed, a group of colonists met to declare their independence. George Washington was general of the army at this time, and although there was a lot of fighting and America did not win initially by much, America nevertheless became strong enough to fight off the redcoats. It was hard because the early colonists were scared. People were revolting and bloodshed was tumultuous, but they could not turn back. This Declaration of Independence had to be followed by all. With some skepticism, the young colonies continued their quest to fight the mother country for what they wanted most, the priceless possession of freedom. A famous colonist once said, quote, "We must fight together, otherwise we will assuredly hang separately," unquote. And the colonists did just that. They hung together, and finally they had achieved their priceless jewel, freedom. They became free and independent states. Now America had to keep up its forces, so it would always be prepared. Their priceless jewel of freedom was there, but they had to be willing to guard and protect it. This concludes our discussion and lecture today on the causes of the American Revolution.